you'd be interested in going back to in a new
No.
capacity? No, you're done.
Chris Pine, the actor who brought Captain Kirk back to life for a new generation and starred in 3 successful Star Trek films that earned over $1.3 billion worldwide, has reportedly quit the franchise after Paramount attempted to slash his salary for a potential 4th film. And according to multiple sources close to the situation, Chris didn't just walk away quietly. He allegedly made it brutally clear to Paramount executives that he considers Star Trek dead under their leadership, that he won't participate in the franchise's continued destruction, and that their attempt to lowball him after years of stringing him along was the final insult that made continuing impossible. This is absolutely devastating for any remaining hope that the Kelvin timeline films could continue. Chris Pine is the modern Kirk. He's the face of the rebooted film series, the anchor around which the entire cast and creative vision were built. Without him, there's no Star Trek 4. Without him, the Kelvin timeline is effectively dead. And according to insiders, that's exactly how Chris sees it. Star Trek is dead, killed by Paramount's incompetence, dishonesty, and complete failure to understand what made the franchise valuable. The fact that Chris quit over a salary dispute makes this even more damning for Paramount. This isn't about Chris being greedy or demanding outrageous money. This is about Paramount trying to pay him significantly less than what he's worth and what he was previously promised, while simultaneously mismanaging the franchise so badly that shows like Starfleet Academy get canceled amid catastrophic backlash. Chris Pine is sending a message. He won't subsidize Paramount's failures by working for below-market rates on a franchise that's being destroyed. Let's break down exactly what happened with the salary negotiations, what Paramount allegedly tried to pull, why Chris Pine decided he was done with Star Trek, and what this means for any remaining possibility that the Kelvin timeline films have a future. According to sources with knowledge of the negotiations, Paramount reached out to Chris Pine in early 2024 about finally moving forward with Star Trek 4 after years of false starts and broken promises. The studio had been talking about a 4th Kelvin timeline film since 2016, making announcements and then letting projects die, hiring writers and directors who eventually moved on, creating false hope among the cast and fans that the film would actually happen. Chris and his representatives had been through this cycle multiple times before. They'd been told Star Trek 4 was happening, only to have Paramount pull the plug. They'd negotiated deals that fell apart when the studio got cold feet about the budget. They'd watched as Paramount prioritized streaming shows over theatrical films, seeming to abandon the Kelvin timeline entirely. So when Paramount came back again in 2024 claiming this time was different, Chris's team was skeptical. The negotiations reportedly started with Paramount offering Chris a salary in the range of $8 million to $12 million for Star Trek 4. To understand why this was insulting, you have to know what Chris was paid for the previous films and what the current market rate is for actors of his caliber and experience leading major franchise films. For Star Trek 2009, Chris was a relative unknown and reportedly made around $600,000, a standard starting salary for a young actor in a major film. For Star Trek Into Darkness 2013, his salary jumped to approximately $1.5 million, reflecting his increased value after the first film's success. For Star Trek Beyond 2016, Chris reportedly made around $6 million, a substantial increase that recognized his status as the franchise lead and his growing profile in Hollywood. Since Star Trek Beyond, Chris has significantly increased his market value. He starred in Wonder Woman 2017 and Wonder Woman 1984 2020 as Steve Trevor, major roles in blockbuster films that grossed over $1.6 billion combined. He's done prestige dramatic work in films like Hell or High Water and Outlaw King. He's proven he can carry different types of films and has established himself as a genuine movie star beyond just Star Trek. The current market rate for established actors leading major franchise films is typically $15 million to $25 million, sometimes significantly more, depending on the project and the actor's leverage. Actors like Chris Hemsworth for Thor films, Chris Evans for Captain America, Robert Downey Jr. for Iron Man, These are the comparables for what Chris Pine should be paid for Star Trek IV. He's the franchise lead with 3 successful films under his belt, bringing built-in audience recognition and proven box office appeal. So for Paramount to offer $8 million to $12 million, significantly less than market rate and barely more than what Chris made for Star Trek Beyond 8 years earlier, was insulting. It suggested Paramount either didn't understand Chris's current value or was deliberately trying to lowball him, hoping he'd accept less out of loyalty to the franchise or desperation to finally make the 4th film happen. According to sources, Chris's representatives rejected the initial offer and countered with a request for approximately $20 million, which would be at the lower end of what comparable franchise leads make, but would represent fair compensation for Chris's experience and the value he brings to Star Trek. They pointed out that Chris had been patient through years of Paramount's false starts, that he'd maintained his interest in the franchise despite the studio's dysfunction, and that he deserved to be paid appropriately. Paramount reportedly responded with an offer of around $15 million, still below what Chris's team was seeking but getting closer to acceptable. There were negotiations back and forth, with Chris's team explaining that he wouldn't work for below-market rates on a franchise that Paramount had repeatedly mismanaged, and that required his participation to succeed. Then came the moment that allegedly killed the negotiations and Chris's relationship with Paramount entirely. According to insiders, Paramount executives told Chris's representatives that the reason they couldn't pay him more was because the Star Trek film budget needed to be kept relatively low given the franchise's recent performance, particularly pointing to Starfleet Academy's failure and the negative reception of recent Star Trek streaming shows as evidence that the brand value had declined. Paramount was essentially telling Chris that because they had destroyed Star Trek's value through their own incompetence, through greenlighting shows like Starfleet Academy that were so bad they had to be canceled, through prioritizing political messaging over quality in their streaming content, through alienating longtime fans, he should accept lower pay to compensate for their failures. This argument reportedly infuriated Chris and his team. The logic was insulting. We've damaged the Star Trek brand through terrible creative decisions. Therefore, you should work for less money to help us recover from our mistakes. Chris had nothing to do with Starfleet Academy or the streaming shows that failed. He wasn't responsible for Paramount's mismanagement of the franchise, but he was being asked to subsidize their recovery by working below market rate. According to sources, Chris's response was to walk away from the negotiations entirely. He reportedly told his representatives to inform Paramount that he was done with Star Trek, that he wouldn't participate in the franchise under current leadership, and that he considered Star Trek dead as long as Paramount continued making the same mistakes that had led to disasters like Starfleet Academy. The phrase "Star Trek is dead" allegedly came from Chris himself in conversations with his team about why he was quitting. According to people who've spoken with Chris, he believes that Paramount has killed Star Trek through years of terrible creative decisions, that the franchise's problems go far beyond any single show or film, and that trying to make Star Trek IV under these conditions would just result in another disappointment that would further damage everyone's careers. Chris reportedly told friends that the salary issue was just the final straw, not the only reason for quitting. The deeper problem was that Paramount had demonstrated repeatedly that they don't understand Star Trek, don't respect the franchise's legacy, and don't know how to make quality Star Trek content. Chris allegedly said something like, "Why would I commit years of my life to a film that Paramount is going to screw up just like they've screwed up everything else they've touched with Star Trek? They can't even make a decent TV show. What makes anyone think they can make a good movie?" The timing of Chris's decision to quit is significant because it came shortly after William Shatner's devastating public criticism of Starfleet Academy and after the show was canceled. According to sources, Chris had been watching the Starfleet Academy controversy closely and had been disturbed by what he saw: a poorly made show that prioritized politics over storytelling, a studio that defended bad creative choices rather than acknowledging failures, and original series legends feeling compelled to publicly attack Paramount's stewardship of the franchise. Chris reportedly reached out to William Shatner and Patrick Stewart during this period, having conversations with both about the state of Star Trek and Paramount's management of the franchise. According to insiders, Both legends told Chris that they couldn't in good conscience encourage him to continue with Star Trek IV, given how Paramount was handling the franchise. They shared their experiences of being ignored when they raised concerns of watching Paramount prioritize ideology over quality of seeing Star Trek's value destroyed through incompetence. These conversations apparently reinforced Chris's growing conviction that Star Trek under Paramount was a lost cause. If the people who created and defined Star Trek, the legends who have the most authority to speak about what the franchise should be, are publicly condemning Paramount's stewardship, why would Chris want to be part of what comes next? The financial aspects also made Chris's decision easier. Unlike some actors who are primarily known for one franchise role, Chris has successfully diversified his career. He's not dependent on Star Trek for income or relevance. He has other opportunities, other franchises, other types of films he can pursue. Walking away from Star Trek doesn't mean walking away from his career. It means choosing not to waste time and energy on a franchise that's being destroyed. According to sources, Chris also considered the risk to his reputation of being associated with a potential Star Trek IV that fails. If Paramount makes the film on a reduced budget with the same creative approach that produced Starfleet Academy, the film could be a critical and commercial disaster. Chris would be blamed as the face of the franchise, even though the failures would be Paramount's responsibility. Why take that risk for below-market compensation when he could do other projects that don't carry the same baggage? The reaction inside Paramount to Chris's decision to quit has been reportedly panicked. Executives understand that without Chris Pine, there's no realistic path forward for Star Trek IV or for continuing the Kelvin timeline. They could theoretically recast Kirk, but that would be a disaster. Fans associate Chris with the role just as strongly as they associated William Shatner with the original Kirk. Recasting would be seen as disrespectful to Chris and would likely fail commercially. Paramount executives have allegedly tried to re-engage negotiations with Chris, offering more money and making promises about creative control and quality. But according to sources, Chris isn't interested. He's made his decision and communicated it clearly. He's done with Star Trek as long as Paramount is running it. The bridge isn't just burned, it's been demolished. The implications for the other Kelvin timeline cast members are significant. Zachary Quinto, Spock, Zoe Saldana, Uhura, Carl Urban, Bones, John Cho, Sulu, and Simon Pegg, Scotty, have all expressed interest in returning for Star Trek IV over the years. But without Chris Pine as Kirk, the film doesn't work. The ensemble cast needs its center, its leader, its Kirk. Chris quitting effectively means the end of their Star Trek involvement as well. According to insiders, several of the other cast members have reached out to Chris to understand his decision, and he's been honest with them about his reasons. The salary disrespect, Paramount's dysfunction, the franchise being dead under current management. Some reportedly agree with his assessment and are relieved to have a reason not to commit to a potentially disastrous project. Others are disappointed, but understand Chris's position. The fan reaction to news of Chris's departure has been massive and overwhelmingly supportive of his decision. Star Trek fans who've watched Paramount destroy the franchise through shows like Starfleet Academy see Chris's quit as another validation of their criticisms. Social media is filled with posts supporting Chris for standing up to Paramount and refusing to participate in Star Trek's continued destruction. The narrative that's emerged is that Chris Pine is protecting his career and his dignity by walking away from a franchise that's being destroyed, just as William Shatner and the original series cast protected their legacies by publicly condemning Starfleet Academy and quitting their association with Paramount Star Trek. Chris is being framed as making the smart, principled decision rather than as abandoning fans or the franchise. Entertainment industry observers are focused on what Chris's departure means for Paramount's overall Star Trek strategy. The studio has been trying to build Star Trek into a major franchise with multiple films and streaming series generating billions in value, but they've fumbled almost every opportunity. The streaming shows have been controversial and underperforming. Starfleet Academy was canceled amid disaster. And now the Kelvin timeline films, which were the most commercially successful part of modern Star Trek, are dead. because Paramount couldn't even negotiate a fair deal with their franchise lead. The financial analysis is particularly damning for Paramount. The three Kelvin timeline films grossed over $1.3 billion worldwide against combined budgets of approximately $550 million, generating substantial profits and building a valuable franchise. A fourth film with the returning cast could have grossed $500 million or more worldwide, generating hundreds of millions in profit and keeping the franchise viable for future films. Instead, Paramount's decision to try to save a few $1,000,000 on Chris Pine's salary has killed a potentially billion-dollar franchise. The executives who thought they could lowball Chris have destroyed more value than they could have possibly saved. This is catastrophic mismanagement that will likely have career consequences for the people responsible. The comparison to other franchise management is instructive. Marvel successfully negotiated with actors like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, paying them enormous salaries for later films in recognition of their value to the franchise. Those investments paid off with billion-dollar films and a franchise that's generated over $25 billion. Disney successfully kept the Star Wars main cast happy enough to return for multiple films, despite that franchise's own creative challenges. Paramount's attempt to lowball Chris Pine represents the opposite approach, trying to save money in the short term while destroying long-term franchise value. It's penny-wise and pound-foolish, the kind of decision that business schools will study as an example of how not to manage valuable intellectual property. The broader implications for Star Trek are severe. With the Kelvin timeline dead, with streaming shows failing or getting canceled, with the original series cast publicly condemning Paramount's stewardship, what's left? How does Star Trek recover from this complete collapse of both the film and television sides of the franchise? Some industry observers suggest Paramount should consider selling Star Trek to a studio that might manage it better. Perhaps Disney, perhaps Amazon, perhaps Netflix. The franchise has enormous latent value, but that value is being destroyed by Paramount's mismanagement. A fresh start under new ownership might be the only path to recovery. Others suggest Paramount needs complete regime change in terms of who makes decisions about Star Trek. The executives and creative leadership responsible for disasters like Starfleet Academy and for losing Chris Pine need to be replaced with people who understand the franchise and can rebuild relationships with talent and fans. Without fundamental changes, Star Trek will continue its decline under Paramount. For Chris Pine personally, the decision to quit Star Trek represents closure on a chapter of his career that brought him fame, but also frustration. He gave Paramount 3 successful films and years of patience waiting for the 4th. He maintained his interest in Kirk and in Star Trek despite the studio's dysfunction. And he finally reached the point where he recognized that continuing wasn't worth the cost to his time, his reputation, or his peace of mind. Chris is reportedly planning to be candid in future interviews about why he left Star Trek, though he'll likely frame it diplomatically rather than burning bridges unnecessarily. But the message will be clear. Paramount's mismanagement and disrespect made continuing impossible, and he doesn't regret walking away from a franchise that's being destroyed. The tragedy of Chris Pine quitting Star Trek is that it was entirely preventable. If Paramount had offered him fair compensation from the start, if they'd demonstrated competence in managing the franchise, if they'd shown respect for what Chris brought to the role, he likely would have signed on for Star Trek 4 and beyond. Instead, they insulted him with a lowball offer, while simultaneously proving through disasters like Starfleet Academy that they don't deserve his participation. Star Trek is dead, not because the concept is outdated or because audiences don't want it, but because Paramount has killed it through incompetence, mismanagement, and a fundamental failure to understand what made the franchise valuable. Chris Pine's decision to quit is just the latest and most visible symptom of a problem that goes much deeper than any single negotiation or any single actor. The Kelvin timeline is over. The streaming shows are failing or canceled. The legends who built Star Trek have publicly condemned Paramount's stewardship. And the actor who was supposed to lead Star Trek into its next chapter has walked away, declaring the franchise dead and making clear he won't be part of its continued destruction. That's the real story here. Not just that Chris Pine quit over money, but that Star Trek under Paramount has deteriorated so badly that its biggest star looked at the situation and concluded that walking away was smarter than staying. When your franchise lead would rather quit than continue, when your legends are publicly attacking you, when your shows are getting canceled amid backlash, you failed as a studio, and Paramount has failed Star Trek completely.